Still today there are bodies of soldiers who fought in the Second World War that are missing. But as each year passes, there are some who are discovered, and there are a number of mass graves which have been discovered over the past few years that tell a dark story of execution and slaughter at the hands of the German army. In 2015, there was a mass grave found inside of Poland, and when this sort of thing is usually found inside of the country, then it is mostly believed to contain the remains of those people slaughtered by the German army or the SS following the invasion of Poland. Hitler ordered large-scale executions of members of the Polish intelligence sector, and there were many victims of the firing squad sent to dispatch them that are still lying deep under the earth. The SS and the Germans made attempts to cover up their crimes, but the grave that was found in southeastern Poland was different. Despite it housing the remains of more than 2,500 people, these were not Polish people who were killed, and historians managed to piece together who these people really were, and it was a surprise. Welcome to The Untold Past. Today we look at the 2,500 prisoners of war found in Poland 70 years after World War II, and as always, to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. The grave that was discovered was found close to the city of Przemyśl, and it was here where a Nazi prisoner of war camp had been set up and established. Specifically, the prison camp here was known as a stalag, and the remains of 2,500 bodies were discovered that belonged to members of the Soviet Red Army and also, surprisingly, the Italian army. What surprised the archaeologists was that the Italians were part of the Axis alliance alongside the Nazis and the Japanese during World War II, as Mussolini allied his nation with his close friend Adolf Hitler. However, Mussolini was deposed by his government in 1943, and with this the Nazis then began to turn on the Italians, and they thought that many were traitors to their alliance, and they were in collusion with the Allies. There were some Italian soldiers who tried to flee the war situation, and some who, with the deposition of Mussolini, refused to fight and stopped, but many of these men were then locked up inside of prisoner of war camps, as they were seen as deserters. A number of them inside of the camps were subjected to very rough treatment, and many German officials wanted these Italian men inside the camps to rot. Some were even subjected to torture, as the German overseers took out their anger at the failing war effort on them. But also in these camps were, of course, members of the Soviet Red Army who had fought back since the Battle of Stalingrad, and who had been regaining a significant amount of land across Europe. One thing to consider, though, is that despite the Red Army being victorious in pushing the Germans back, the losses that were sustained by them were colossal and huge in their numbers. Stalin seemed to have an endless supply of soldiers that he could throw at any battle, but those Soviet soldiers who found themselves inside of German captivity were usually subjected to the worst treatment. These were seen as ardent enemies of the Nazis, and many would be shot in executions inside of neck shooting facilities within the concentration camps, and these were false medical facilities and centres where they were executed with a shot to the nape of the neck. But the remains that were found in the mass grave were tricky for the archaeologists to sort out between Italian and Soviet soldiers, as there had been 70 years since the end of the war, and it was tricky for identification to take place. They excavated the different bones and parts of the remains, and the skulls of the soldiers were the first to be lifted from the mass graves, and then these were used to count how many people were buried there. One thing that shocked the archaeologists who worked on the mass grave was that these were just bodies inside the grave, and there was very little personal belongings that came from the pit. Usually clothes and other identifying objects could be found, as well as daily objects from coins to hair combs, but very little was discovered, meaning that these people had nothing to little on them when they were killed. The very select things that were found included spoons, tiny crosses, and toothbrushes, but all this told the story that these people were killed, and they had nothing, and even their clothes had been taken off when they were buried. These people were the prisoners of the prisoner of war camps, and the Soviet and Italian soldiers had died from the conditions of it. They had died from starvation and disease inside of a site, and then the German authorities had stripped them of their clothes and belongings, and then thrown them in the mass grave. It was hoped that the remains of the soldiers would be repatriated to a nearby military cemetery near to the town of Neripka. This cemetery wasn't open at the time of the discovery, so the remains were stored until the time came. Still today there are remains of many people buried inside of mass graves, and these people were victims of the Germans during the Second World War. There are each year discovery is made that bring the scars of the conflict back to the forefronts of our minds. These men inside of the mass grave had suffered in their final days, and they were the lost victims of the Nazis until their remains were discovered. But little identification could be performed, as there was no way of telling who these remains belonged to. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.